Hollywood has always been a place of dreams, a factory of stories that captivated the world. But behind the carefully crafted images of its greatest stars were real human beings navigating extraordinary pressures. These are their stories, not to tear down their legacies, but to understand them more fully and to recognize how the entertainment industry shaped and sometimes failed the very people it celebrated. Few names in history carry the electricity of Marilyn Monroe. The white dress over the subway grate, the breathless birthday serenade, the smile that seemed to light up the world. That image was carefully crafted, but the woman behind it was far more complex and compelling than any studio photograph. Norma Jean Mortensen was born on June 1, 1926 in Los Angeles, California. Her early years were marked by instability. Her mother struggled with significant mental health challenges and was institutionalized during Norma Jean's childhood. She moved between foster homes and an orphanage, showing a resilience that would define the rest of her life. By the time she was remade into Marilyn Monroe, the name itself a studio creation, the distance between who she had been and who she was required to be had become vast. 20th Century Fox saw in her extraordinary marketability. But what wasn't advertised was the psychological weight of that transformation. Monroe herself, in interviews and private writings documented by biographers, expressed profound anxiety about her public image and a persistent desire to be taken seriously as an actress. She sought out the Actors Studio in New York, studied under Lee Strasberg, and worked intensely to develop her craft, because she wanted to be far more than a blonde bombshell. She was prescribed medications throughout her career, a practice common in the studio system of that era, and her dependence on these substances grew over time, intersecting with insomnia, anxiety, and a deep sense of personal isolation. On August 5, 1962, Monroe was found unresponsive at her home in Brentwood, Los Angeles. She was 36 years old. The official cause of death was acute barbiturate poisoning. What is beyond dispute is this: a woman of extraordinary complexity had been packaged as the embodiment of carefree fantasy, and the distance between that packaging and the person who wore it was something she carried every single day. There is a moment in The Wizard of Oz, released in 1939, when its star was just 17, where Dorothy whispers that she doesn't think they're in Kansas anymore. Viewed through the lens of what came after, it reads like something more than dialogue. Frances Ethel Gum was born on June 10, 1922, in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. She was performing in vaudeville acts with her sisters before she had fully learned to read. When MGM signed her in 1935 at age 13, the industry had already spent years deciding what she would become. They renamed her Judy Garland, and, according to extensively documented historical accounts, studio representatives provided the teenage performer with amphetamines to suppress appetite and maintain energy during long shooting days, and then barbiturates to help her sleep when shooting was done. The long-term consequences of these decisions were profound. By her 20s, Garland was already navigating a complicated relationship with medications she had been given in adolescence. Her professional schedule was relentless. Exhaustion wasn't treated as a reason to rest. It was treated as a problem to be managed. In 1950, MGM terminated her contract. She was 28 years old. What followed were years of remarkable professional comebacks alongside personal struggles. Her 1961 concert at Carnegie Hall remains one of the greatest live performances in American entertainment history. On June 22, 1969, Garland was found unresponsive at her London home. She was 47 years old. The coroner's inquest determined her death resulted from an accidental overdose of barbiturates. The arc of her story had begun in a studio office where adults decided to alter a child's body to serve their vision, before she was old enough to understand or consent to what was happening. Roy Harold Scherer, Jr. was born on November 17, 1925, in Winnetka, Illinois. He arrived in Hollywood in the late 1940s with a face that studios recognized as extraordinarily marketable. Universal Pictures signed him, renamed him Rock Hudson, and carefully constructed a romantic leading man whose image defined the 1950s. He starred opposite Doris Day in Pillow Talk, received an Academy Award nomination for Giant, and became one of the most bankable names in the industry. He was also gay, a fact that, in that era, would have ended his career immediately if publicly known. This is not speculation. Hudson himself discussed his sexuality before his death. What's remarkable is the degree to which his employers were aware and actively managed it. In 1955, Hudson married Phyllis Gates, the secretary of his agent. The marriage was arranged, according to multiple accounts including Gates's own memoir, at least in part to preempt a damaging story that fan magazines were investigating. The marriage lasted 3 years. Hudson navigated a private life completely cordoned off from his public identity for decades. The performance never stopped, not on set, not at press junkets, not in interviews. Then, in July 1985, a spokesperson confirmed he had been diagnosed with HIV. He was the first major public figure to publicly disclose such a diagnosis, forcing a cultural reckoning that institutions had been resisting. Many Americans who had dismissed the AIDS crisis were confronted with the fact that it had been present in the life of someone they believed they knew. He died on October 2, 1985, in Beverly Hills. He was 59 years old. There is no figure in cinema history quite like Charlie Chaplin, not in scope, not in influence, and not in the remarkable distance between the tenderness of what he created and the turbulence of his personal life. Charles Spencer Chaplin was born on April 16, 1889, in Walworth, London. His childhood was defined by extreme poverty. His father died young, and his mother suffered mental health crises that led to her institutionalization. Chaplin navigated genuine destitution as a child, including time in workhouses. These experiences shaped his artistic vision and were the engine behind the tramp, the small man in battered shoes, who became a universal symbol of the dignity of the powerless. He arrived in America in 1913 and was recognized almost immediately as something singular. Off-screen, though, his personal life attracted significant controversy. His marriages to Mildred Harris, 1918, and Lita Gray, 1924, both of whom were 16 at the time of marriage, have been extensively examined by biographers. The political dimension of his life added another layer. Chaplin had expressed sympathy with left-wing ideas throughout his career, and in 1952, while he was at sea traveling to England, the U.S. Attorney General revoked his re-entry permit pending a hearing into his political beliefs. Chaplin chose to settle in Switzerland rather than fight the decision. He received an honorary Academy Award in 1972, one of the longest standing ovations in ceremony history. He died on December 25, 1977, in Coursier-sur-Vevey, Switzerland. He was 88 years old. The man who created cinema's most beloved underdog had spent his final chapter in exile, celebrated globally, expelled nationally. If there was ever a star who seemed to leap from the pages of a swashbuckling adventure novel, it was Errol Flynn. Born on June 20, 1909, in Hobart, Tasmania, Flynn arrived in Hollywood in the mid-1930s and became the embodiment of cinematic daring. Captain Blood, The Adventures of Robin Hood, The Sea Hawk, film after film presented him as the indestructible hero, charming, fearless, always grinning. Flynn's private life was one of sustained excess that gradually accumulated a very real cost. His alcohol consumption was, by his own account in his posthumously published memoir, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, substantial and habitual from early in his career. In 1942, he was charged with statutory rape involving 2 young women. He was acquitted on all charges following a trial in early 1943, but the proceedings generated intense press coverage that permanently altered how his image was read. By the 1950s, the physical toll of his lifestyle was increasingly visible. Studios that had competed to cast him were now uncertain how to use him. He died on October 14, 1959, in Vancouver, British Columbia. He was 50 years old. His physician noted that his body showed deterioration more consistent with a significantly older man. Flynn himself seemed to regard his excesses with weary acceptance, though the distance between the indestructible hero on screen and the vulnerable human being whose body gave out at 50 is impossible to overlook. Her face was printed on a photograph attached to the first nuclear bomb tested at Bikini Atoll in 1946, without her knowledge or consent. For a period in the 1940s, Rita Hayworth was perhaps the most desired woman in the world, and she had almost nothing to do with creating the woman the world desired. She was born Margarita Carmen Cancino on October 17, 1918, in Brooklyn, New York. Her father was a Spanish-born dancer, and she began performing in his act as a young child. When Columbia Pictures signed her in 1937, studio head Harry Cohn saw a project. Her dark hair was lightened, her hairline was altered through repeated electrolysis, her name was changed. The Spanish dancer's daughter was remade into an all-American glamour goddess so thoroughly that many audiences never knew who she had been before. She starred in Gilda in 1946, delivering a performance that became one of the defining images of 1940s Hollywood. Hayworth reportedly described the gap between the fantasy and her private reality with sharp precision. Men went to bed with Gilda and woke up with her. It was a description of isolation so complete it had become her defining experience. By the 1970s, those close to Hayworth noticed changes: unpredictability, confusion, disorientation. In 1981, her daughter Yasmin Khan confirmed a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, making Hayworth among the first public figures whose experience with the condition received significant media attention. Rita Hayworth died on May 14, 1987, in New York City. She was 68 years old. Montgomery Clift arrived in Hollywood carrying a quality the industry had rarely encountered. He was genuinely, uncomfortably real. Born on October 17, 1920, in Omaha, Nebraska, Clift trained seriously in New York theater before transitioning to film. His performances in Red River, A Place in the Sun, and From Here to Eternity established him as one of the most emotionally precise actors of his generation. He received 4 Academy Award nominations and was considered, alongside Marlon Brando and James Dean, part of a new wave of performers who brought psychological complexity to American film. He was also, throughout his career, navigating the private strain of concealing his sexuality in an era that offered no safe alternative. On May 12, 1956, leaving a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's home, his car struck a telephone pole. Taylor was among the first to reach him and reportedly saved his life by removing a tooth lodged in his throat. He survived, but his injuries were severe, requiring extensive reconstructive surgery that permanently altered his appearance. The period that followed was one of gradual decline. His use of alcohol and prescription medications increased, intersecting with chronic pain and psychological difficulty. He still managed notable work, including a powerful performance in Judgment at Nuremberg in 1961, but the trajectory of his health did not reverse. He died on July 23, 1966, at his New York City home. He was 45 years old, a man of exceptional gifts, who had never been given the freedom to simply be himself. She first appeared on screen as a child, and the camera loved her immediately. Natalie Wood, born Natasha Nikolaevna Zakharenko on July 20, 1938, in San Francisco, was performing in films before she was 5 years old. By the time she appeared in Miracle on 34th Street at age 9, she was already a known name. Her transition to adult roles in Rebel Without a Cause alongside James Dean seemed effortless. In reality, very little about her life was. Wood's mother was, by multiple accounts, an intensely controlling presence who shaped her daughter's career from its earliest stages. The studio system found this arrangement entirely convenient. Wood received Academy Award nominations for Rebel Without a Cause, Splendor in the Grass, and Love with the Proper Stranger. She married Robert Wagner in 1957, divorced in 1962, remarried in 1972. Throughout her life, she had a documented, significant fear of dark water, known to those close to her and mentioned in numerous biographical accounts. On the night of November 28 to 29, 1981, Wood was aboard the yacht Splendor near Catalina Island with her husband Robert Wagner and actor Christopher Walken. At some point during that night, she went into the water. She was 43 years old. Her body was found the following morning approximately 1 mile from the yacht. Initially classified as accidental drowning, the manner of death was amended to undetermined in 2012 after new evidence emerged. The investigation was reopened in 2011, and questions about the precise circumstances of how she entered the water remain officially unresolved. They called him the King of Hollywood, and the title was not merely marketing. Clark Gable, born William Clark Gable on February 1, 1901 in Cadiz, Ohio, rose from laboring work in regional theater to become, by the mid-1930s, the dominant masculine presence in American cinema. It Happened One Night won him the Academy Award for Best Actor. Gone with the Wind placed him at the summit of his industry. He was Rhett Butler. Behind the image presented to the public was often a more complex personal story. Early in his life, Clark Gable's marriages to drama coach Josephine Dillon and socialite Maria Langham provided both professional guidance and financial stability that helped shape the early stages of his career. However, these relationships did not align with the carefully constructed image of confident independence that MGM promoted at the time. His most profound personal loss came in January 1942 when his wife, Carol Lombard, died in a plane crash while returning from a war bonds tour. Friends and colleagues later described this event as deeply affecting him for the rest of his life. Shortly afterward, Gable enlisted in the Army Air Forces, flew missions over Europe, and returned from the war noticeably changed by the experience. Another subject that has drawn historical attention involves actress Loretta Young. The two co-starred in The Call of the Wild in 1935. In 1936, Young announced that she had adopted an infant daughter. Years later, in her 1994 memoir Uncommon Knowledge, Judy Lewis wrote about her belief that Gable was her biological father and that her parentage had been kept private due to the social and professional pressures of the era. Young did not publicly confirm this account before her passing in 2000. Gable died on November 16, 1960, following a heart attack at the age of 59. Few actors reshaped screen performance as profoundly as Marlon Brando. Born on April 3, 1924, in Omaha, Nebraska, Brando introduced a new emotional realism to American film, embracing vulnerability and emotional complexity in ways that felt groundbreaking at the time. His performances as Stanley Kowalski in A Streetcar Named Desire and Don Vito Corleone in The Godfather remain among the most influential in cinema history. Brando received 2 Academy Awards for Best Actor for On the Waterfront and The Godfather. He famously declined the latter, sending Sachin Littlefeather to speak about the representation of Native Americans in the film industry. His personal life, however, was often marked by challenges and family difficulties. He was married 3 times and fathered several children, later reflecting in his autobiography that balancing family life and career had been difficult for him. In the early 1990s, a tragic incident involving his family brought significant public attention and personal hardship. In the years that followed, those close to Brando described a man who increasingly withdrew from public life while coping with personal loss. He died on July 1, 2004, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles at the age of 80. These stories reflect a broader reality of Hollywood's golden age. The public often saw carefully shaped personas, while the individuals behind them lived far more complicated lives. What connects these figures is not only personal struggle or success, but also the powerful studio system that influenced how actors were presented, what aspects of their lives were publicized, and how their careers were managed. The era produced extraordinary films and lasting cultural impact, but it also operated within industry practices that sometimes placed image and commercial success above personal well-being. Many decisions, related to appearance, public identity, or professional direction, were shaped by the expectations and norms of the time. The historical record remains incomplete, and many experiences are only partially understood today. Recognizing both the achievements and the challenges of these individuals allows for a fuller understanding of Hollywood's past. These were artists working under intense pressure in an industry still evolving in how it treated its most visible talents. Understanding the golden age of Hollywood means acknowledging both its creativity and its limitations. These stories matter not because they diminish the art that was created, but because they remind us that behind every legend was a human being navigating extraordinary circumstances.